My grandpa asked in confusion. Why are you taking a taxi? What happened to the BMW we bought you for your 21st birthday? My mom cut in with a smile. That car belongs to his sister now. Grandpa went quiet, deep in thought, and what he did next made me proud of him. My grandpa blinked at me and asked, honestly puzzled, why I'd taken a taxi and what on earth had happened to the BMW they'd given me for my 21st birthday. And before I could even open my mouth, my mom jumped in with a smile and said that the car belonged to my sister now. And Grandpa went quiet after that, staring off like he was sorting something heavy in his head. And what he did next ended up making me proud in a way I didn't expect. My name's Jake, I'm 26, the oldest grandkid, the quiet one in a family that never stops talking, the guy who fixes things without making a scene. If a chair wobbles, I level it. If someone forgets a birthday, I show up with a cake and a marker. I run a small workshop out of a rented garage where I hand-paint Christmas ornaments, glass birds, tiny cabins with snowy windows, and little snow globes that don't leak as long as you seal them right. And most days my hands smell like lacquer no matter how much I wash them. I'm big on lists, bad coffee that tastes like metal, and that clean feeling you get when a paint line comes out straight and your hand doesn't shake. Folks say I'm patient, but really I just hate conflict, and I figured out young that staying calm and pulling out a credit card fixes most family problems faster than arguing ever could. That's our Jake. My mom likes to say he's reliable. That Saturday was the day everything cracked. I showed up at my grandparents' place in a taxi because my arms were loaded with sample boxes for the holiday market, and because the BMW wasn't mine anymore, and I still had glitter stuck in my hair from a batch of snowflakes that shed like scared cats. I was halfway up the porch, bracing a box with my knee, when Grandpa Earl opened the door in his sweater vest and said, warm but surprised, "Hey, buddy, why'd you come by taxi? And where's the BMW we bought you for your 21st? I locked up, the screen door sighing behind him, and in the hallway mirror I caught my reflection, worn out, smudged, looking exactly like the kind of guy who'd say everything was fine when it wasn't. Before I could explain, my mom Linda came out of the dining room wearing that bright, rehearsed smile that means she's already written the script and said, that car belongs to his sister now. Like it was a joke everyone should enjoy. The whole room shifted. My Uncle Ron stopped chewing. The old clock in the foyer suddenly sounded like it was shouting, and Grandpa Earl went very still as he looked from her to me and back again like he was reading labels on cans he didn't remember buying. Belongs to who? He asked, even though he'd heard her. To Kayla, Mom said. You know how hard she works, and Jake barely drives, he just paints little balls, followed by a soft fake laugh that pretends to be nice. Uncle Ron snorted right on time. Mom, I tried to say, my voice coming out thin and useless. Kayla leaned around the corner with a straw in her water and a ring light glow in her eyes and chirped. It's just logistics. I've got meetings. Grandpa rubbed his jaw once, the way he does when he's adding numbers in his head. Then he gave my shoulder a gentle pat and said, Come on in, son, and led me to the table. He didn't yell or argue, just folded his napkin and, in the same polite tone he uses with contractors who overcharge, started asking questions. And I wish I could tell you I said something sharp right then, but I didn't. I sat next to him and pressed my thumb into the edge of a sample box until it bit my skin, took a breath, and tasted metal. His first question was simple. When did the car start belonging to your sister? Mom tried to cut in with my dad's name as a warning, but Grandpa said, Let the boy speak, and then looked straight at me and said, Go on. The truth felt like it was crouched in my chest, scratching to get out, and all I managed was, I don't know. It just happened, which was the worst part because it had happened like that so many times before. People love to romanticize family business, imagining warm smells, bells on doors, and cousins laughing while they tie bows. But in my family business is just the word you use when you need Jake to swipe his card without asking questions. I started Jake's workshop when I was 19 after a seasonal job packing craft kits. Spent my first paycheck on a temperamental used airbrush and a box of misprinted glass bulbs from a party store going out of business. And at night, I watched videos on hand lettering until my eyes burned. That first Christmas, I set up a folding table outside a grocery store and froze my face off while painting names like Emma, Tyler, Coach Mark, names I still remember because those people stopped and smiled at a kid doing careful work. By 21, I had regular customers, teachers who came back every year for classroom stars, and couples who ordered tiny versions of their houses with the right number of windows. The BMW was Grandpa Earl's idea, and he said a craftsman needed dependable wheels. Marched me to a dealership, skipped the flashy junk, and picked a sensible used sedan with good brakes and a trunk big enough for market racks, shook the salesman's hand, and said, "This isn't for show, it's for work," before handing me the keys with a kind of pride that felt warmer than any speech. Mom smiled for the photo, but later that smile cooled, not because she hated me having a car, since she loved anything that could be leveraged, but because she wasn't the one driving the moment, and she talked about keeping things balanced, about family equity, which in our house meant that if Jake has a tool it becomes shared property, and if Kayla has a platform it becomes the family identity. Kayla's 22, magnetic, and what Mom calls front of house, which really means she posts online and talks to cameras like they're people, and the people talk back. And once in high school she got free leggings for a shout-out, and you'd think she cured a disease. The slide started small, with Kayla needing rides to collaborations, then borrowing the BMW for a weekend, then Mom needing the business debit card for a little ad spend to help everyone, asking for logins so she could support me with marketing, and I kept saying yes, because saying no in our house feels like slamming a door in a library where everyone hears it and takes offense. And then came the first loan when Mom called me while I was sealing a dozen tiny reindeer and said in that sugary voice of hers, "Honey, your father's hours got cut this month." She asked if I could front the mortgage just until the tax return came in, and I did it without much hesitation, $1,800 plus fees. Then the next month it was just a small adjustment for utilities, and after that she promised we'd square everything once Kayla's brand deal landed. Except it never did, and instead they kept reminding me that we were a team and that, as the entrepreneur, I should just write it off. While all that was happening, the BMW basically moved into Kayla's driveway, and she posted mirror selfies with my car like it had been dropped into her life by the content gods. And when I asked to use it for a market across town, she groaned and said she already had shoots and reminded me I worked out of a garage, saying it the way someone talks about the weather, not mean, just factual. When I pushed back, Mom sighed like I was being difficult and told me I hardly drove anyway, that I should just wait, that Uber was a business expense, and that Kayla had meetings, so I started taking Ubers to load-ins and stuffing boxes into strangers' trunks while they watched me like I was building a nest. I kept telling myself not to be petty, tried pouring the frustration into clean lines and holly leaves, convinced myself Christmas sales would fix everything and that the numbers would clear the fog, but instead the fog got thicker. Charges started hitting my card that I didn't recognize, $249 for a promoted post package labeled Family Growth, then $119 for an influencer boost, then $87 here and $63 there, and I realized my business card was hooked to a family marketing account Kayla had set up. When I confronted her, she just blinked and said the brand had to grow, and when I asked what brand, she said the brand was me, and I told her the brand was actually me painting until my shoulders burned, and Mom cut in from the doorway telling me not to be selfish because my sister was bringing eyes to my little shop, and that kind of exposure was priceless. That's when I started tracking everything, building a spreadsheet at 2 in the morning while my breath fogged in the cold garage because the space heater kept tripping the breaker, logging mortgage transfers, ad charges, gas for a car I didn't even have, gifted inventory sent out for reach, and refunded custom orders Kayla had promised on my behalf because we needed to be generous for audience trust. And I added the total twice because I didn't believe it the first time. Our family group chat is called Hearth and Home, which is only funny if you enjoy paying, and Mom announced the Thanksgiving plan and said everyone needed to contribute $300 for catering, added that Kayla couldn't because she was investing in content, that Jake would cover for her, and that I also owed them for car insurance. I typed and erased 10 replies before finally writing that I'd covered a lot already and that I needed the BMW back and for them to stop using my card. And Mom fired back, instantly calling me ungrateful and saying Grandpa had given that card to the family and they'd decide what was best. Kayla dropped a heart on Mom's message and posted a selfie captioned on the grind, and Dad sent a thumbs up emoji, which is the universal signal for not wanting to be involved. That same week my bank sent an overdraft alert because my shop rent auto debit hit right after another ad charge cleared, and I slept on the workshop floor that night since going home felt like giving up ground. listening to the clock tick and making promises to the ceiling that this was the last time I'd carry everyone and that I'd finally say something. 2 days later, we were back at Grandpa Earl's table with roasted chicken, soft rolls, and peas swimming in butter that tasted like being a kid again, and he passed the plate and asked about the car the same way someone asks about the weather. Mom tried to shut it down, telling him not to make it a thing, but Grandpa smiled without his eyes and said he just wanted the story, and Kayla stirred her water with a straw and said it was simple because she was using the car more. Grandpa looked at me and asked if I agreed it was that simple, and the only word I managed to say was no, small but solid, and even though it didn't fix anything, it changed something in me. The next morning, Mom added me to a new chat called Holiday Strategy filled with color-coded cells and percentages that looked like a ransom note, laying out a family booth where Kayla films, I produce, Dad handles logistics, and profits are split 60% to Kayla for marketing, 20% to the family fund for house bills, and 20% to me for materials. And I stared at the screen until the numbers blurred because it was theft dressed up as teamwork. I told them no, that it was my booth and my products, that I'd pay for help, but I wasn't giving away 80%. And Mom reminded me they raised me while Kayla said she also needed the Square reader and had already connected my account so payouts would hit her wallet faster, easier for everyone except me. I didn't argue in long messages. I just opened a new tab and started a list called Everything I've Paid For. And it was longer than I could hold in my head, the total sitting there like a dare. And that's when I realized I couldn't keep being both the bank and the business. I called Grandpa Earl and asked for advice, my voice sounding like it belonged to someone else. And he told me to come over with no questions, already waiting with a yellow legal pad when I arrived and sliding a pin toward me as he asked me to show him what I owed and what they owed me. I opened my laptop and walked him through the spreadsheet. The mortgage transfers, utilities just until tax time, ad packages I never approved, gas, insurance I didn't use, inventory gifted to influencers who never tagged us, and refunds Kayla issued without asking for the sake of goodwill, and he listened without interrupting, marking a single tick for every $100 like a metronome. When I finished, he looked at the page and then at me and said I'd been subsidizing their lifestyle and that they were calling it love to make it easier to swallow. And something in my chest finally loosened because he named it plainly, without fancy language. He poured coffee and said, "Okay, here's what we do." And that night, I changed every password, unlinked every device, closed the joint account Mom had forgotten to remove herself from, ordered a new Square reader, and drafted a PDF titled Record of Transfers, Unauthorized Charges, and Inventory Losses. Then I sent one message to Holiday Strategy and one to Hearth and Home saying it was me. That here were the receipts for everything I'd paid toward the house and the business, without consent totaling $8,742.19, that I would not fund their bills this winter, wouldn't use Kayla's marketing, wouldn't split profits, and that if the BMW wasn't returned by Friday at 5, I'd report unauthorized use of a business asset, because this was my boundary. And Mom replied with one line asking if I was really threatening my own mother. "Shame," Kayla said, all sharp edges. "Over a car, grow up," and Dad chimed in with "let's calm down," but I didn't answer either of them. I just took Grandpa Earl's truck to the shop and worked until 3 in the morning making 2 new signs, one that said custom name ornaments and another that listed cash card Venmo new reader, and then the last line, family discounts suspended, and taping that one up hurt and healed me at the same time. Friday came, and at 5:23 the BMW still wasn't in my lot. And at 5:26 I clicked report vehicle misuse with my insurer and sent the PDF to the family thread plus my aunt who's a paralegal and Grandpa Earl, subject line plain and boring, record for business files. My phone started lighting up like a slot machine, Mom demanding how dare I involve outsiders, Kayla texting that I'd ruined her weekend, and me replying once and only once that the car needed to be returned or I'd proceed. At 7-Eleven that night, headlights swept into the lot, and Kayla climbed out, tossed the keys like she was flicking away gum, wouldn't look at me, and said the tank was low because she needed it, and there was a fresh scratch along the rear door, so I took photos and didn't say a word. She called an Uber and left, and the lot went quiet except for the cheap banner I'd hung flapping against its grommets, and I rested my forehead on the cool roof of the BMW and shook with relief and rage and grief, all twisted together. Then my phone buzzed, and it was Grandpa Earl saying he was proud of me and to come by tomorrow. I slept 4 hours and got to the market before dawn, because December markets are a battlefield of smiles where you're freezing, your feet hurt, and your brain keeps whispering that you priced everything too low. But that first weekend after I drew the line, I felt light, like I'd finally set down a box I didn't realize I'd been carrying. Grandpa Earl showed up at 9 sharp in his old wool coat, bought 6 ornaments he absolutely didn't need, handed me a thermos of coffee, and took the spare stool behind the table, calling my lettering like a baseball announcer and telling me I had a good curve on that G, and he never mentioned Mom because he didn't have to. By noon, I'd sold out of the dog bone ornaments, and a woman asked for Milo with a tiny heart. And while I painted, my phone buzzed nonstop with Mom swinging between guilt and fury, saying I embarrassed them, that if insurance went up I'd pay, that family shares, and I muted the thread and painted Milo clean and small. Around 2, Dad drifted up to the booth with his hands stuck in his jacket like they weren't allowed out, and told the air near my ear that my mother was upset, and I said I knew and that I wouldn't discuss money without Grandpa Earl, and my voice sounded steady in a way I barely recognized, and Dad nodded once and walked off like he'd wandered into the wrong waiting room. That evening, Mom posted on Facebook about children who forget who fed them and tagged me. One aunt called to tell me to apologize, another texted that she was proud of me, and told me quietly, always quietly. Sunday morning, Grandpa Earl called a family coffee, and everyone showed because when he asks, you show up, and he had 2 folders on the table, my spreadsheet and a thin stack of documents with neat tabs. Mom started fast, telling him I was blowing things up and punishing Kayla, and that she needed support, and the car was just a car, but Grandpa Earl raised a hand and said we'd start with numbers, then tapped the folder and said I'd transferred just under $9,000 to their household that year and paid about $2,000 more in business charges for the family without authorization, and that I'd also lost use of a vehicle he purchased specifically for my work. He looked at Kayla and said that was theft by use even if she hadn't intended harm, and her mouth opened and closed while Mom laughed brittle and told him not to use legal words because this was family, and Grandpa Earl said family should be the last place you encounter theft, and the room went silent except for the refrigerator hum while Dad stared at the grout. Grandpa Earl turned to me and asked what I wanted, and I didn't give a speech. I just said I wanted the charges stopped, repayment on a plan, and a boundary, because my business is mine. He nodded and said good, then slid the thin stack toward me, and said he also wanted me safe, and that years ago he'd set aside a small trust meant for family needs, but after seeing how needs were being defined, he'd reassigned it to me for the business, not a fortune, just enough for a proper lease and a second workbench. Mom's chair scraped loud as she said he couldn't reward my tantrum and accused him of encouraging selfishness, but Grandpa Earl looked at her with kindness that didn't move and said he was encouraging work and boundaries. Dad tried to find the middle and suggested maybe I could still contribute to the house after things stabilized, and I said no, quiet and firm, that I wouldn't fund the house, and that if they needed help I'd bring groceries when I could, and that was where it ended. Mom pointed at me with a shaking finger and said I owed them because they raised me, and I told her they raised me to be useful and that I was choosing to be respected. Kayla's voice came out small, asking where that left her because she'd been counting on collaborations and engagement, and Grandpa Earl said gently that if her brand needed her brother's money to exist, then it wasn't a brand, it was dependence, and Kayla almost cried before she caught herself and said whatever and that she'd figure it out, and I told her I hoped she would and meant it. There was no dramatic ending or group hug. I took the folder and went back to the workshop, and that week I signed a short lease on a corner unit with big windows you can clean from the inside, moved my racks at night with help from my neighbor who works night shifts as a nurse and refuses cash, so I paid her with a Best Neighbor 2025 ornament instead. I printed a clean window sign with store hours and custom orders welcome, posted one video with just my hands dotting snow on a tiny blue mailbox, no face, and it got 100 likes from strangers and one from Grandpa Earl, who doesn't even have an account, which means a cousin showed him how, and he pressed the heart on purpose. Mom adjusted strategies and asked if I could loan Kayla some blanks so she could start her own line, and I said no, and she frowned like I'd broken a vase, then asked to borrow the BMW so Dad could check something under the hood, and I told her the car stays in my lot with a steering wheel club lock, and she called me dramatic, and I said okay. And that was the entire conversation. A local paper ran a tiny holiday maker's piece and photographed my hands because my nails are permanently silver and the reporter thought that looked atmospheric. The caption said small shop, steady hands, and Grandpa Earl clipped the article and stuck it to his fridge with a tomato magnet, pointing at it every time I visited like it might grow if we believed in it hard enough. On Christmas Eve, I closed early and took a box of seconds to the senior center, paint-smudged pieces and crooked hats, the ones I'd never sell, and the manager cried and told me they were perfect to them. Driving home, I passed my parents' house, and through the window, I saw Kayla filming by the tree, smile wide and lights just right. And for a moment, I felt a sharp ache for a version of us that never really existed. Then I kept driving because I had cocoa to make and a shop to open in the morning. January came in quiet, and quiet is where you can hear yourself think. So I used the trust to fix a leak, install a proper spray booth, and hire a high school kid named Jess for afternoons, who labels straighter than I do and tells me when my display looks like a dad's shelf, which she says like an insult and a compass, and we laugh a lot. Mom still sends little probes, family dinner, bring ornaments, and I answer can't, shop hours, which is true and also boundary language, and sometimes she sends a thumbs down and sometimes nothing at all. Dad came in twice and paid cash for Fisherman 1989 ornaments, standing like a man on a boat he didn't trust, and told me Grandpa Earl was proud and said I'd done right, and I wrapped the boxes and said good. Kayla posted a rebrand video in February, all lifestyle and drifting tips and apartment resets, and she didn't ask for blanks again. Then she came in once, bought a tiny camera ornament for a friend, paid full price, and we didn't hug or fight. We were just two adults at a counter, which felt like a start. Customers began telling me their own boundary stories while I lettered names. A nurse who stopped paying her brother's tickets. A son who took back a pickup used as the family Uber. A grandmother who said no to being the holiday ATM, and they left with ribbons and lighter shoulders, like the ornament had weighed something before it weighed nothing. One Tuesday, Grandpa Earl sat in the back with a crossword and said without looking up that work is long but honest, and that beats applause, and I kept painting and noticed I was breathing easier than I had in years. Boundaries look mean to people who benefit from you not having any. They call your no a betrayal and say you've forgotten where you came from and make being used sound like being loved, and I used to fall for that, but I don't anymore. Saying no didn't shrink my life. It made room. I sleep. I eat meals on plates instead of over a trash can in the garage. I bring a small box of not-quites to the senior center every month. Jess talks about math tests and playlists while she packs, and I call things what they are by saying I can't do that without explaining like a hostage negotiator. My relationship with Mom is accurate now. She invites and I decline. And when we talk, I keep it to the weather in her garden and step over any sentence that tries to slide money into it, while Dad hovers between us like a moth trying to choose a lamp. Kayla is figuring herself out on camera, and good for her. What Grandpa Earl did after that quiet moment at the table went beyond paperwork, because he didn't rescue me. He stood next to me while I rescued myself, and he looked at me like I was already a man doing a hard, ordinary thing, which made the ground under my feet feel real again. I used to think love meant paying any bill with family written in the memo, but now I think love looks like a chair pulled up beside you and hot coffee while you make an honest list of what you can and cannot give, because love doesn't spend what isn't offered, and it doesn't rename theft to make it easier to swallow. I'm Jake. I make small, breakable things that somehow last, and I'll help when I can, gladly and freely with both hands. But I won't be anyone's bank, and I won't be guilted into funding the version of me they prefer, the quiet wallet with paint under his nails, because I won't let myself be used again. That's the line, and it isn't moving. And if someone calls that selfish, then fine, because I know what it costs to say yes to everything, and I like what my no has bought me better, which is time, quiet, steady hands, and a life that finally feels like mine.